Yeah, so we still have people joining, so we'll let everybody join before we start. Yeah, I still see people jumping in on this. So let's let everybody get into the session, and then we'll start shortly. Just remember that the chat is for everybody to communicate with each other. And if you have questions, you can put that in the Q&A. Give everybody another minute to jump in, and then we'll get started. Okay, it looks like it's leveling off a little bit in attendees list. So let's get this started here. Hi, so I'm Michael Smolin. I'm the color pipeline and workflow manager here at Blackmagic Design. With me today is Matt Dijon.
Yep. Hi, I'm the VFX and editorial workflow manager.
Today, we're going to be talking about collaboration within Resolve. Resolve 17 has some really great collaboration function. Before we get started, if you have any questions that we don't get to in the Q&A, you guys can always ping us at workflow at Blackmagic Design. That hits the workflow team here at Blackmagic Design, and it'll hit myself, Matt, Ramon, Heather, Jim. We'll all see your questions, and we can answer them if we don't get to them here in this demo. Today is kind of like a watch and learn, just so everyone knows. We're going to show you, we're going to talk about what is Resolve collaboration. We're going to show you how to set up your database. We're going to show you how to share a database. We're going to talk about setting up a project, common storage, shared cache. We're going to talk about setting up a user, and we'll talk about setting up your work environment, because since there's more than one person working in Resolve at the same time, you can set your local environment differently, which doesn't affect the project. We'll talk about some functions that don't apply in collaboration, like live save and dynamic project switching. Then we'll get to how the different pages work. So how we communicate through the collaboration using the chat feature. How the edit page works in collaboration, which is, timeline ownership and relationship to other pages, bin locking, timeline locking, refreshing. We can get into some best practices. Then we'll talk about how the color page works, which is a little different, which is clip locking, how to match grades with multiple colorists, refreshing your timeline. Matt will go into how the Fusion page works in collaboration, clip locking, copying nodes between comps, refreshing, multiple VFX artists, versions, and backups. And then we'll talk about other layers of collaboration that work in Resolve, like Frame.io, and also with what's new to Resolve 17 is DRTs and DRBs. So I think I'll throw it over to Matt, and he's going to talk about how to set up a database and your environment, your networking settings, and things like that. So I'm going to stop my share here, Matt.
Yeah, and I'll take over the screen share. So let's do this. So this is a quick overview of the network topology we have going here. This is a local setup where Mike is on one of these DaVinci Resolve stations. I'm on another DaVinci Resolve station. And typically we would have a separate DaVinci Resolve project database server. In this particular case, I'm actually running that database server on my station. So that can work in this scenario. Just for demonstration purposes, generally, we recommend having a separate computer so that if you need to reboot your computer or your computer has any issues, everybody else doesn't go offline. But for a 2-hour demo, we should be fine. That's all connected via a 10 gigabit switch, which is also connected to a shared NAS storage. That way, we are getting our project database traffic and our media traffic all getting distributed through this 10 gigabit network. Now, there's another modification you can do to this. You can have a separate switch for your database traffic only. For larger projects and larger teams, that's usually a good idea. That way, your media traffic doesn't compete with your database traffic. And in that kind of a scenario, a 1 gigabit switch can work well for your database traffic. So that's a quick overview. One other thing worth talking about is collaboration at this point works locally. That means these stations are all on the same network and subnet. So it does not work in the cloud per se, as in the project server being in the cloud. However, you could conceptually set up an AWS environment where you have all the computers on the same subnet able to communicate with each other, and your project server would live up there as well, and everybody else would connect into remote stations in the cloud. That's basically still kind of a local environment. It's just separate from you. Similarly, you can have this kind of local setup in a studio and have artists accessing their workstation via Jump, RGS, or a few different remote desktop solutions. That's been done pretty frequently over the course of COVID, and something that a lot of productions have done. Let's see. So before we move on, a couple questions to answer. This is being recorded, but we're not actually able to share it. So sorry about that. Let's see. With the slides, Mike, do you want to touch on that at all? Maybe just type that answer. And I'll just move on from there. If there's any of those you can answer, Mike. So first thing, I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of this. First thing to note is that with DaVinci Resolve 17, there is actually a separate download for the project database server. So your downloads can all be found at blackmagicdesign.com under the support tab. And then if you click DaVinci Resolve and Fusion software, that'll filter your results over here. And you can see we've got DaVinci Resolve Studio, which is the version you'd want to use. Though the free version, the regular version of DaVinci Resolve is able to do collaboration now. So DaVinci Resolve Studio, and then if I scroll down a bit further, we'll see the DaVinci Resolve project server. And so right now we're up to 17.3. It will get updated at a different pace as the main application, but best case, best practice is to keep it up to date. So if you're on 17.3 and above, you would want to have DaVinci Resolve Project Server 17.3. And so you download there, you have your own installer. Once you have it installed, you'll see this is your traditional DaVinci Resolve icon, and right next to it is the project server icon that looks like this. So let's go to that application. So this is how that application looks. It looks very similar to the project manager in regular DaVinci Resolve, but this is just for managing Postgres SQL databases. So I'll go ahead and create a new project here. I do that by clicking this new database icon, and I'll name this lab demo. Okay, and I have that right here. You can see that these two arrows are already highlighted. That means that this database has been enabled for sharing. I can disable or enable sharing by clicking this icon here. And so now it's disabled. If I want this Postgres database to be accessible to anybody on the network, I would enable sharing. And so I'll do that. It's going to authorize on this, this network IP address. Real quick, there is also the option under File to choose your network interface that you want to share your database on. And so we'll just leave this to the first one. We will enable sharing. And now that is enabled. So the next step is to create an access key that DaVinci Resolve will be able to use to point Resolve to this Postgres database. So you do that by clicking the export access key. And I'm going to go ahead and drop that on a shared network storage, that NAS that I showed earlier. And I will just save it right here. Okay, so now that access key is in this location. I'll go ahead and bring that up to show where that's saved. Okay, so this is the collab_demo.resolve_db key. So that'll allow Mike and myself to have access to the database. A couple other notes here on the project server is you can back up your project database here with this icon. You can restore backed up project database is with this icon. And then that's the big parts of the project database server. It's just going to run in the background. I can go ahead and just close this out, and that will continue to run in the background. So now let's go over to the regular version of Resolve. And I've got my collaboration key here. And usually what you'll see is the project database or the project manager looking like this. You'll want to disclose the databases with this icon here. And these are my local databases, and these are my Postgres shared databases. I don't have any loaded at the moment. So to load it, I just need to drag this Resolve DB key here, and now it's loaded. To actually add projects or access projects that are part of that database, I click that icon, and now this will be the first project that we get going. So I'm going to go ahead and just restore a project archive or a .dra file that already has media and everything ready to go. Everybody's favorite tutorial, Age of Airplanes, if you've attended any of these demos before. And we'll go ahead and open that up. Okay. And so now we've got our project. At this point, this is just a normal DaVinci Resolve project. It's actually not collaborative yet. This is just a typical project that's now located on a shared database. And that brings up a good point on using project databases. There's more than one way to use it. This is one where you have individual projects located in that database that are first come, first serve. That being said, if Mike wanted to view this, he could view this project, but he wouldn't actually be able to make any changes. Since we want to collaborate on the project together at the same time, I need to enable collaboration. And I do that by going to File, Enable Collaboration. And the only difference you'll see is we get two additional icons. We get a collaboration chat icon, which we'll get into in a minute, and we get a collaborators icon. And here you can set your name as it appears in this project and the color of your icon. So I've set that up there. And then also in the project manager, you'll see we get this additional icon that has two people in there, and that just indicates that this is a collaborative project. So a couple setup items to take care of in a collaborative project are under project settings, which you can get to with this gear icon in the lower right-hand corner, or through the file menu to project settings. So one very important thing to set up right away is where your working folders are located. Since gallery stills and proxy files and optimized media are going to be shared among collaborators, we want those to be located on the central storage. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and locate my proxies under this shared NAS, and I've got two shares on that NAS. One is the QNAP and one is a cache. Now I'm going to use QNAP because this is rated with a backup drive, so I don't want to lose my proxy files that it generate. And I'll just select this proxy media folder. And then same thing with my gallery stills, which is the bottom of the working folders. I put that in the same QNAP folder. Now my cache, I'm actually going to locate that on this cache share, which is all NVMe. So I'll get a little bit of extra performance boost, and cache is volatile and it could be blown away at any time. So it's not really necessary for it to have any redundancy and backup. So I'm going to use this cache location. One important thing to note, cache is user specific. So each user will have their own cache for a particular project. Okay, now that's all set up. Mike, I'll go ahead and have you take it over and show adding that project on your side and some of the specific user stuff.
Yeah. One thing I think I wanted to bring up too before I go further is, new in 17 is creating proxy media. So we have a few things going on here. We have cache, which is for immediate playback. And when we're doing a collaborative project, and some of the projects that we currently are working on, we're working off the raw OCN. But you can also, and depending on what that file size is, you can get extra playback performance by caching your media. You can optimize your media for better playback performance, and you can also make proxy media from your original media that links back to the OCN, which is new in Resolve 17. This can become useful for archiving your project later on. And also, if you have proxy media, maybe you for instance, have a bunch of 8K source footage. You want to multi-clip those together, and you can't quite get the performance with maybe 4 camera angles playing 8K together, depending on your setup. You might want to use proxy media in order to multi-clip do your multicam clips and get more real-time performance that way. All right, let me share my screen. I'll come over here into the location where Matt put the Resolve database key. Grab new collab. Just drop that on there. Interesting. Is it the new collab? Is that which one it was, Matt?
Yes, it is.
That does not seem to be adding into my databases.
Oh, let me double check. Yeah, so it will be new collab. Real-time problem solving. Yeah, that's the only one in that share.
What's the IP address?
So what Mike is doing right now is he's doing a little bit of troubleshooting, which you would do if we ran into this kind of a situation. So the IP address you want to ping is 169.254.98.115.
Okay, well, I'm seeing that. So I know that we're communicating on the same network.
Might be worth checking a service order. So Mike, why don't you look into that a little bit, and I will show I will do your next part as you kind of look at service order and see if you can get that sorted on your side.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, so let me see. The part Mike was going to talk about is setting up an individual user, which I did very quickly here, setting up my project member. In addition to that, I'm going to talk a little bit about using local overrides. So using local overrides for video monitoring allows you to tailor your video monitoring output based off of what hardware you have available on your computer. So let's say, your editor has an HD monitor, but maybe your colorist has a 444 monitor or a UHD monitor. Then they could use local overrides to monitor at Ultra HD. So that's the main purpose of this. You can set up individual video monitoring. One other thing to touch on, because 17 introduced proxies, an important thing to consider is that your proxies, let's say we had proxies generated for all these and they were raw media. By default, use proxy media if available will be selected. Now, this is a setting that is project-wide. So individual users can't necessarily turn that off themselves. So you're either on proxy media or you're off proxy media. So that's one important thing to keep in mind. Let me look at a couple of the Q&A questions, see if there's any burning questions that would be good for everybody. So there was a question about the Blackmagic products we're using for the live stream production. Really, on this one, it comes down to the software. I'm running a deck link. Mike is running an Ultra Studio for our personal monitoring. And then we're connected to a webcam. There's a lot of streaming products we have now, including like the ATEM minis and Streaming Bridge and whatnot, and various other products that do streaming as well. But we're not using them in this case. We're kind of relying on Zoom.
Hey, so I'm back up here and I've gotten the project online.
Cool. All right, let me give that back to you then.
All right, let's share my screen.
I left off talking a bit about local overrides. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the error was you ran into and how you fixed it?
Yeah, basically, I changed the service order, but more importantly, it wasn't seeing the new key that you created. So I basically had to quit out of Resolve, refresh the QNAP window, and then when I came back into Resolve, I was able to drop the key in here. I think he touched on use local overrides. That's something that pops up when you're in collaboration mode. But actually, first, now that I'm on here, let's give myself a name, and Mike. You can do that in the lower corner here on the icon and give myself a color. And then we have the chat function, which is a way for you to collaborate between between all the users. So if I just pop up the chat window here, I can see that Matt is on here, and I can, say hello and just send him a chat. You can direct it at somebody. You can say at Matt, hello. And Matt will answer that. And so what's great about the chat function, so Matt, why don't you just type something back real quick so that they can see when a chat comes through, when you're chatting, it doesn't like pop up on your screen and block your session. So this little chat icon will turn orange down here. So it's non-intrusive, so that you've got a communication here and you can open at your leisure. We can click on that. It says hi, Mike. And so that's like the collaborative chat function. And you can go across all the users who are in the project. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. If you go to your project settings, you'll see that now that this is a collaborative project, it says use local overrides. So if you check this box, you're not affecting the entire project. You're just affecting your local environment. And this is really good because obviously, if you're a colorist, you might have a broadcast quality monitor in the room that you're grading with, or you might be on a projector. So you might have other monitoring settings in your room. If you're a visual effects artist, you might have, some kind of sRGB monitor that you're looking at, or a broadcast monitor that you're doing your comps on. So you might want to have your environment set differently. And obviously, if you're an editor, you might have like a three monitor setup, like 2 GUI monitors and maybe like an LG in your room. So you could all effectively, using this local override selection, select the way you're viewing in your room without modifying the project for everybody else. So that's just by clicking the local overrides button. And now you're taking control of just your local environment. Super important. Let's save that. What else do we have in here?
Those were the big ones before starting talking about timeline locking and stuff, I think.
Yeah. So I think, are there any other questions about what you just saw about how to set up a database, bin lock, or
yeah. There was one good one, or there's a couple good ones. So one that might be useful for multiple people. So Aaron asked, does all media for a shared project have to be accessible via both workstations, or can a copy of the media be put on both individual computers and only the project file itself shared via the network? He says network/internet. It is only the network, not the internet. We would like to test using this, but IT would explode working from the network, even with proxy files. So to answer that question, yes, you can have individual storage devices as long as there's parity among them in terms of the volume name, and ideally exactly all the media that's located on those drives. That can work.
you can do some kind of, RV sync to keep your drives, sunk together with media, but you both media storage devices would have to be, identical and kept up to date. Otherwise you would break something in the project or have missing media. So that's possible.
Cool. And then looking at, is it possible to see again the process of the keychain creation? Yeah. So let me take over real quick, Mike, and I'll just show how to make that key real quick, and then that's the big stuff to answer live, I think.
Okay, I gave you.
Yeah. Okay. So this is regular Resolve. I'll go ahead and launch the project server. To create the access key, it's this upper right-hand corner icon here. I have my collab demo database selected. I generate my access key here and then save it to a location. And wherever you're going to save it, that's a way you can kind of manage who has access to which project databases. Let's say you have multiple teams working on different projects. You can control that on your shared storage. Okay, moving on to some of the big stuff here about collaboration. Let's go ahead and pop over to the timeline, and I'll go ahead and load up the finished timeline, Mike. So this is our finished timeline. It operates just as you would expect on the edit page. I can make my edit changes and do all that stuff, but Mike is also in this project. So what he would see, how this works is timeline locking is on a first come, first serve basis. So I have control of this timeline, which means I can make edits on it. I know I have control because my playhead is red, and I can make edits. If Mike were to do any changes or to view this timeline, his playhead would be gray and he wouldn't be able to make changes. He can still play it back, but he wouldn't be able to make changes.
Well, why don't you stop for a second and we can jump on mine so I can show him what the gray playhead looks like. So we'll come over to mine.
Yeah, so I stopped share. This is Mike.
So now we're over to me, and you can see my playhead is gray. If I grab any of these clips and try to move them around, they are locked out to me. Obviously, I can play this timeline back, no problem. So I can view this. I just can't make any changes. And then I know that because my playhead is gray.
And Mike, before you stop sharing, I made a little update to this timeline. And why don't you talk about that refresh?
Okay, so when somebody makes a change to the timeline, I can see that it's been done. If I look up in the upper right-hand corner here, there's this refresh icon. The change doesn't happen immediately, so it's not going to interrupt you, but you can refresh the timeline at your leisure. So I'll come over here and I'll just click the refresh button, and we'll see the changes that Matt made right away. So if I click on that, my timeline has changed, and now I'm on the current cut. You also get like a little prompt in here that a timeline has changed. You'll see like a little refresh thing happen right next to the bin that the change has occurred in. So it's kind of in two places, but if you click the refresh button here, it'll also jumping onto the timeline, like maybe you're on a different timeline and you jump into the timeline, obviously it's going to refresh itself.
Cool. So I'll go ahead and take over screen sharing here real quick. So if you kind of collide at some point and one editor has access to the timeline, but they said they've jumped off and you still can't get it, sometimes what has to happen is you have to change pages. So pop to the media page, pop back to the edit page, or sometimes if you're working in tabs, you may actually have to have that editor close their tab. So that's just to kind of push that release, which I wasn't meaning to close that, to actually release that, that control. So one important thing to note about timeline locking is that timeline locking is shared across the edit page, the cut page, and also the Fairlight page. That's because all these pages, you can essentially do editing tasks of manipulating clips where they're positioned on the timeline and stuff like that. So all those pages share timeline control. So that means if I have control over the edit page, nobody can be doing work in the Fairlight page or the cut page. So we'll go on to the other forms of control and locking, but one I'll touch on now is bin locking. So bin locking is very similar in that it's a first come, first served basis. I'm currently in this bin, so I have control of it. And I can see Mike has control of the audio bin because I can see his icon here. When I hover over him, Mike's name pops up. You can also explicitly lock bins. So I'm going to go ahead and lock this bin, and I'm going to lock this bin. And what that means is I keep control of those bins even if I move off of them. And Mike, why don't you go ahead and lock 2 bins? There you go. So Mike has locked 2 bins, so his icon shows up on those 2 bins as well. Now, that being said, I can't actually manipulate the items that are in his bin, but I can copy an item out. So if I wanted to copy this into my own bin, I can do that, and then I can manipulate this instance of that item as much as I want and won't affect the item that's in his bin. This is really useful in an editor, an assistant editor kind of scenario where the assistant editor needs to grab a current reel and make an output for some form of a deliverable or a file for screening or what have you. That's bin locking. In terms of kind of how multiple people work together at once, multiple editors, often it does come down to how your bin structure is organized. So what we typically see is editors working in real bins, and they'll have multiple versions of that timeline over time. And we'll have assistant editors in either their own bins or different prep bins, so they can do their work and then move that to the editor's bin when he's ready to work with that material. So that's generally how we see it being used. Even though anybody can have access to bins, you know, it's kind of just an organizational thing that AEs and editors will work out. Like, okay, these are mainly my bins, these are your bins, and that's where they will do most of their work. So that's bin locking. Mike, do we have any burning questions to touch on there?
Let's see here. I think we touched on this one. Can the gray side copy clips from the block timeline to another timeline? Yes.
Yep.
We can. I think he just demonstrated that you can copy anything from a locked bin to a new folder and create another timeline. So that's if 2 colors are working in the color page. Well, we're going to get to the color page in a second, so you can see how that works. So we'll answer. I think some of this will be answered in that one.
There's one interesting question here about proxies. So it says, so proxies could be identical, but would it retain the info of a conform? So the really nice thing about how Resolve works with proxies is that you generate your proxies from the actual media itself. So let's say this was a raw file or your high-res master. You can create your proxy, and let's say you choose your proxy format and your resolution. So that can be half, quarter, eighth, etc. So the beautiful part about it is this is one entry in the project, but if I generate a proxy for it, which I'll just go ahead and do for good measure. So now I have a proxy for this, and I'll go to the media page so we can see a little bit better. That one instance is capturing both the raw media and the proxy media in one. So as you're editing with proxy media, you're actually also editing with the raw media. So right now, this is the file path to the raw media. I can show the proxy path as well. So there's proxy and proxy media path, and that will show up somewhere. It popped. Oh, here we go. So we can see the proxy media resolution here is 1280 by 720, and then none for these clips because we don't have one yet. And then I think I showed the media path. Yeah, that's the last one. And so you can see that this is my proxy media path. And it's named kind of the exact same and whatnot. So we can be editing with this proxy all the way. And then when we want to do our final renders, we can either turn off proxy media here and or disable use proxy media from the deliver page. So that's not really a collaboration thing, but I think it's a cool, unique enough feature that spend a little bit of time on it now.
Yeah, and I think what's great about the proxy media is when you even if you're not planning on making proxy media, I think it's a consideration for when you are archiving your project, because typically projects will back up the OCN, the original camera negative or the original camera media, to like LTO. And then at the end, when you're done with the project, and since you already have those LTOs backed up of the original camera media, you can do a project archive of just the proxy media, which we've already shown that links back to the OCN. So your project footprint is going to be really small, like about I think we got it down to like 5% of the original size of the project. So that way, instead of maybe your project is 100 terabytes, you can archive it down to just between 8 and 10, which is easy to carry away on a drive. Also, a few projects that Matt and I have worked on recently, because of the pandemic, they've had to shut down their cutting rooms or move to working from home. It's a lot easier to manage the project when you have proxy media. You can copy off that proxy media to a much smaller drive instead of taking the entire 100 terabytes home with you. You can walk away with a small drive and then work from home, and everybody can have a copy of the media. So it works in just other ways of working collaboratively.
Another question was, does the update to the sequence update on save or live? It will update as you're going along, but you can also force the update with a Command S or Control S. Anything else before we move on to color page, Mike?
Just reading here really quick.
Yeah.
I think we answered all these
Cool.
pretty much.
All right.
So
So I'll give over control to you.
Cool. And I can share my screen. I'm still here on the edit page, but let's just jump over to the color page. So the color page is a little bit different than the edit page, in the sense that it's not timeline locking, it's actually clip locking. So you can have multiple people in a timeline at one time. So Matt, why don't you just jump over to the color page really quick and go on to like event number 2, just so that I can show them. So you can see I'm on event 5 right now, right here. And then you can see that Matt is here on event number 2. And I know that because his icon's here and I can hover over it. But so because it's clip locking, it's first come, first serve on a particular clip. So basically, this gives you the ability to have multiple colorists working at the same time. Some facilities have like a final colorist and then a pre-colorist doing work in the background, maybe taking the looks that were set and matching whole scenes. So what you could do is I could just do a little grade on this scene. I'll just make it like a weird color really quickly. And Actually, you know what? First, Matt, can you just do a little color change on the event you're on right now?
You got it. You'll love it.
Okay, so I can see that Matt has made a change to that clip because the refresh icon is on there. And Matt, you can jump off that clip really quickly. Now I can either push the refresh button up here in the upper right and it'll refresh it, but I can just jump to the clip and see what the color is there. So I can see the color. And Matt, I'm going to jump off of it and you jump back on that clip. And now I'm going to jump on the clip that Matt has access to right now because his icon was on it. And if I try to make any color changes, like moving any of these, you can see it's locked out to me because Matt has first come on that. So Matt, why don't you jump off that clip right now? And now since he's jumped off of it, I'll just refresh it by jumping back in. And now I can now change the clip again because I have control of that clip. So that's how the clip locking works. I'm going to go back to this clip really quickly and I'm just going to make a change to this. I'll make it really red so somebody can see what's going on here. So we made that really warm in the highlights. And so let's say I'm in a session where I'm sitting with the director of photography or the director of the film and we're setting looks. I can actually set a look on a shot and then I can come into the chat and I can say, Matt, please match grades to event 5. So I can send that off to Matt. And then we can close the chat window. And now I can move forward and just keep on setting looks on other scenes while Matt is in the background, copying, the grades, copying the grade. And I can see that he's working in the background because I see his icon moving around, but I also see that, it's refreshing. Now I can choose to refresh as I go if I want, but likely I'm going to be grading, sitting with the director or the DP while this is happening in the background. So we're going to set looks on another scene. Like we'll set a look here on this nighttime scene really quickly, make it a little bit darker. And, push the highlights a little bit more, add some saturation. So I'm setting a look on this shot while Matt's jumping around in the background. Now I want to check and see what Matt has done. And I can jump back into these I can either hit the refresh button, so I can do that right now. And the whole timeline will refresh. And when I jump onto these clips, we can see that his color, my color has been translated to these clips already. This gives you a sense of how you can, you can have a colorist, you can have a bunch of other colorists in the background matching looks while the lead colorist is going through an entire reel or multiple reels at the same time, grading clips. Matt, why don't you jump to the edit page and just make a change, like a bunch of changes, like edit wise. So what's really great about the color page and the edit page in collaboration is a lot of times the director, this gives you the ability to be working on a cut that hasn't been locked. So color can start much earlier because now since we're working collaboratively, the director can actually see what's happening in the color bay, even if he's not in the color bay. So maybe I'm sitting with the DP and I'm setting looks. Whatever I'm doing in the color bay is actually translating back to the edit page. So you can see those changes happening live and vice versa. So let's say I'm going through this timeline and I've set a few looks like I have here. I've got a scene graded, but they're still editing and making changes. And I might not want to see that until I'm ready. So I know that there's changes made to the timeline because again, I have the refresh icon up here. and I don't want to see my shots jumbling around, but maybe we get to lunchtime and we're going to take a break, and we want to move on to the latest cut of this reel. We can now refresh the timeline, and now you can see my shots have jumbled around a little bit. The cut is changed just a bit, but
Yeah, particularly at the end,
yeah.
swaps. Yeah.
So he swapped this shot here at the end between event 11 and 12. So now I'm working on the latest cut, but my grades will follow wherever these shots have changed. So I don't have to regrade those shots per se. I might have to look and see if it still, flows from one scene to the next, because those shots that they're around have changed. But for the most part, these grades are going to be the final grade. Where this can really help you is let's say you're on a show that's doing like a preview screening, or it has a bunch of rounds of previews, and you want to do the final color before the preview stage. Yes, you're going to be grading extra scenes, and maybe some of those scenes will get cut out, but this helps you not have to regrade the entire movie when they finally get to a locked cut, because you can be working at the same time as they're grading, and it doesn't matter how they, if they shave frames off certain shots or shorten up scenes, your grades are still associated to those clips, no matter where they move them around to in the timeline. So this is a really great way of, maybe they move a whole scene later into a reel, that your grades are going to translate over there. And then this also, like I said, whatever is happening on the color page, they're seeing this in edit, and they're also seeing this in visual effects. So any pre-visualized visual effects that are being done, it's being done. They're able to see the color grade right there in their viewer, so they're able to see that. And on the edit side, if the director can't be in the color bay, well, he's seeing these color changes happening while he's still cutting the film. So you can see how there's an advantage of doing this collaborative workflow when you're all working together. So this is clip locking. You can have multiple people in here at the same time.
Speaking of the edit page, let me take over real quick to show what the updates look like from the color page to the edit page.
Cool.
So I'm on the edit page. The scenario Mike was talking about with the colorist working maybe with the DP and the editor working with the director on the same timeline means obviously the director can be in more than one place at one time. So I can see the colorist has done a bunch of work here. I get a little update icon on each of these items that have changed, and an update icon up here. Now, at some point, the director is going to want to see those color updates, but maybe not quite yet. So I can hold off on updating. But then when we want to do a quick check and just see how things are going over in the color bay, we can hit update, and then we get all of our color updates. So that's a really useful way for more than one, obviously the editor and the colorist working together. So I think that's it for color and how it relates to the edit page. We can also talk about the fusion page, so the visual effects component.
Did you see any questions there, Matt, before we move on?
I saw a few, some that are like probably good to hit on at the end.
Okay.
As well. So, okay. So we're on the fusion page. So the fusion page, for those that are not familiar, it's a node-based compositor. And from the media in node, this basically takes the timeline's input. So if I'm on the timeline, I'm over this particular clip. If I go to the fusion page, I am seeing just this clip come in through my media node, my media in node. So then I'll do all my effects on this pipe here. So let's say I do something very simple and not very useful, like a blur, to just blur out the image a bit. So this is one of the nodes. I can have many, many nodes to create a visual effect, do things like, paint outs, compositing CG elements, add particle systems, whatever that might be, rain, fog, snow. And then it will feed back out to the timeline via the media out. You can see the effect comes back to the to this page. As far as collaboration is concerned, it's very similar to how the color page works. I have a clips menu here, or clips panel, and it is a first come, first serve basis on a clip basis. So Mike, if you want to jump into one of the clips and just do a little, some kind of an effect, that'd be great. So I have control over this particular clip right now, and I can navigate between them and do effects to multiple shots at once. I can see Mike is here, and he's going to be doing some work on that airplane shot. So Mike's going to do that. Once he's done, I can go and maybe check his work. So you can have multiple visual effects artists working on the same timeline at the same time. I think this approach in a collaborative sense is really useful for commercials or potentially last minute fixes. Let's say in the final color, you're trying to get this project out the door, but there's something that has to be fixed last minute. You can have a visual effects artist pop into the timeline, do a quick paint out or a quick fix, and then the colorist could just render from there. And you're not having to do a new VFX pull. Have the visual effects artist do the work, render it, re-import it, conform it back in. You just do it in the timeline and get it done and out the door. In the context of larger projects, what I've seen is very common is a visual effects artist having their own bin, and they'll do their work there. They'll still do renders and whatnot, but it's still useful to work within this collaborative project because let's say I need to do some temp visual effects on this shot here. I have my ins and outs already from the edit. It's already accessing the raw media if you're cutting with raw. So I can copy that instance into my own, let's say, VFX bin. And I'll make a new bin for this shot. New timeline. And drop that that shot in here to have visual effects. And so from here, I can do all my visual effects right on this media, render it out. If the editor updates that timeline, I can quickly go back and see what the new ins and outs are and actually change the duration because I'm actually working from the raw media, as opposed to having to do a new VFX pull. So that's a quick example of how you can work collaboratively. It's a bit different. Traditionally, you would do an EXR pull for a visual effects artist to do their work. But if you're cutting with raw media, you actually can do the work directly off the raw media if you manage your color properly and whatnot. That's a little bit outside of the scope of this discussion, but it's been used on a number of features with internal editorial doing work that way with some embedded visual effects artists. So just to recap on the Fusion page, it's clip-based locking, very similar to the color page. All those same rules apply, basically. I can see here that Mike's done some work. It won't update until I jump over to it, and then I can see what he's done, which in this case wasn't anything.
Actually, if you jump over to event 9, I did something there.
Oh, there it is. The ever popular blur.
Yeah. A really nasty blur.
Yes. Any questions on the Fusion side of things and that clip locking process? Okay. Mike, let me give it back over to you to talk about some of those other collaboration topics.
Cool. So let me just share my screen. Okay, cool. So there is another great layer of, there's a couple other ways that you can collaborate within Resolve that's really great. As another layer of collaboration. So if you go to DaVinci Resolve and you go to your preferences and you go to internet accounts, You can add a Frame.io account here in your internet accounts. So if you have one set up for your project, or you have one you want to log into, you can log into it here. When you do that, you get a little folder that's linked directly to your Frame.io account. So for instance, let's say you have some exports, or you want to, if I go to the timeline and I just say, I think it's under edit. Oh, sorry, file, quick export. This is exporting the timeline as it currently is. And if you select Frame.io, you can put it directly into a project folder on Frame.io. What this allows you to do, now that this has been loaded up in Frame.io, it allows everybody, it'll ping everybody on Frame.io, first of all, that something new has gone into the project. But also when you open that up and you make markers on that upload, those markers will directly populate this Resolve timeline, which is really great. So instead of, having to read an email at this time code, something's happened, we can actually get a marker in the timeline from Frame.io, and we can go to that marker and see what that node is. I have an example of some that I've done in the past. So let's go to the media page, and we'll go to my Frame.io folder, Black Magic, and we'll go under this dailies folder. So I have a couple of clips that I've uploaded as a dailies folder, and I'm just going to drop one, or I'll drop all three of these into this bin here real quick. And we'll give it a second. As you can see, a little caret appears on these clips as I click on them and they update. Might not be, there you go. And then if you click this caret down, you can see that there are some markers in here. And actually the markers are on these clips. So if we go to marker 1, it's going to say that, it's going to give me the note for this clip. It says, please bring this down. And then please repo this for background action. So we have notes in here. We also have annotations. So annotations from Frame.io will come over. So if you export a timeline using that quick export, yeah, here's some more annotations. She looks washed out. You will get markers back from Frame.io that directly populate your timeline. And since we're in a collaborative project, everybody will see those notes, if they're edit specific notes, or if they're color specific notes, or visual effects specific notes. We'll all have these markers in our timeline that we can skip to via the export you do, and they populate the timeline and everybody can see them, which is really great. Another way of collaborating in Resolve, which is new in Resolve.
Real quick, one thing to note too is you can also do annotations within Resolve itself and not necessarily within Frame.io.
Yeah, you can do annotations in Resolve. And draw on the frame and things like that. That's how I made this. I drew in Resolve and then uploaded those markers to do a demo.
Can you just show how to access that real quick in the lower left of the viewer?
I think it's, where is it? Here,
Yeah.
right? And then annotations, and then you can just draw or.
So this could be useful if you have a visual effects artist, in a commercial scenario doing stuff as it's being edited, and the editor's like, oh, we still need to paint this bit out or whatever.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of.
Yeah.
Good.
Amazing.
So there you go. You can. That's how I did it in to make those demo, and it's by frame wherever you. Of course, where I just did that, it dropped a marker so we can see where I did that on that clip.
Yeah.
What's new in Resolve? What's new in Resolve 17 is we have the ability to make DRTs and DRBs. It's really helpful if you are collaborating and you're on maybe two separate systems. For instance, let's say I'm on set and I'm separated from the collaborative project, and the editors in the production office are collaborating, but I want to send them a dailies timeline, or I want to send them a bin of something. Uh, what you can do is for instance, let's say this is my dailies timeline. You can right click your timeline and you can say export DRT. You're going to get a pop-up window here, and you can save it to a location, and then you can email that DRT file to editorial, and then they can bring that up, and then it'll if the folder structure is identical and they drop the media into there into the same folder hierarchy, you won't have to do a relink. But if you bring up the timeline and you have media offline, you can use the little chain link and direct it to the folder where you have just copied the media. So maybe I'm sending them dailies media and a DRT. They can load the DRT into the collaborative project and then link the media wherever they're copying it on their centralized storage. And then they can relink the dailies and then start cutting with it. Another good thing is let's say I'm on set and I'm doing the dailies, and there's a bunch of takes that are maybe false starts or things that editorial wants to see, but they don't want to see it in the dailies timeline. You can create a new bin, and I'll just do it really quickly and just say add new bin, and I'll call it false starts. One. So we made a bin that's false starts day one, and I can just put a bunch of media in here. Put a bunch of files over here. And now if I right click this bin and I say export bin, anything that's in that bin, you can even create a timeline for those false starts if you want. You could like cut them onto a timeline, and they could have the scratch audio from the camera, or maybe you have sunk audio for those false starts. Maybe it's just the video. You can put them in that bin, and you can say, or you can put them on a timeline. You can, save this bin, and it'll export the timeline, the media, all in that bin. And then when they import the bin, they'll have the media and the timeline, and it'll already be, linked. You don't have to do a relink. It already has that media right there. It knows what it's looking for. So this is a good way, and I've used it a bunch of times for just that purpose. But that just shows you that you can share bins with people. You can share timelines with people. You can use Frame.io with people who are not part of the collaborative project. Maybe you're on a commercial job and you've just done the work in the color bay, and you do a quick export and send it to the ad agency via Frame.io. They comment, those notes come back into your timeline. You address the notes with the post supervisor in the room, and then you render out your timeline, and they're good to go. The commercial is finished. That's one way of using it. Another way of using collaboration, is between the dailies, the onset people and the editorial, by exchanging DRTs and DRBs. And then, on top of that is actual collaboration.
So,
do you have any questions?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to dive into is cache again, because it is a little bit different than proxies or the gallery stills, which are shared. So let me take over sharing real quick again.
Yeah.
So Richard, I think, brought up a good point about it. Okay, so now caching, because it is user specific, you can do a different location for caching per person that's local, right? So if my fast volume is actually whatever, my C drive or my D drive or whatever, I can do that. So I can, let's say, just go here and I'll just make my cache there. So this is on my local station now. So everything is going to cache on my local station to my super fast NVMe, local NVMe. So that is possible to do. You can see my timeline here is actually recaching to that location. I choose to do it to the NVMe in the QNAP because it's a kind of separate volume, and cache can build up pretty quickly, actually, and fill up your volumes pretty quickly. So that's why I do it, but you can do caching directly to your local individual station. So that's that one. What else do we got? Mike, there was a question about video monitoring, lookup tables, and that kind of stuff. That first one in the Q&A.
About the video monitor lookup table.
Yeah, it says, what about video monitor lookup table? We use different LUTs per workstation for monitor calibration. And in collaboration, that is, quote unquote, a problem.
I think it just depends on where you're loading that LUT. I mean, if you use DCTLs, I mean, you can still, you know, I mean, you can put it on your, oh, let's take a look here really quickly.
And you want to take over screen share too?
Yeah.
One thing to know while Mike's diving into that too, I think it's with 17, and I don't think it was in 16. You can choose a location for your LUT directory that is something other than your system. So you can have your LUTs on a centralized storage, and from there you could potentially have your calibrations in, you know, let's say a calibration folder for that particular computer, but you could access it from the central location. So that's one way to potentially deal with it, but go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and obviously, if you're gonna have a show LUT per and you're loading it in the lookup tables color management area, that's project specific. So if you're doing it that way, then yes, you're gonna want to probably have your colorist set up in a specific you know, in a specific collaborative project. So that you're all viewing the you know, your monitor lookup table together at the same time. What you could do is you could set up your project using the monitor lookup table, and the colorists are using it that way, but then you can use local overrides for the editor and set up his viewing environment a little bit differently. Although that wouldn't change the lookup table, but you could put some sort of a lookup table on his output on the nodes, either in the media pool or on the color page, and try to do something that way. I mean, I think what we're talking about here is a specific setup, and we could certainly talk offline more about how to use it that way. I mean, basically, we have a couple of projects we work on right now where we control everything from onset all the way to the end and finishing. So the actual lookup table goes on the specific clips in the media pool, so that everybody's viewing those clips the same way. So when an editor pulls a clip into a timeline, it already has the LUT associated to that clip. And then when we go to grade, we actually switch the lookup table off in the media pool, and then we start grading it so that everybody is now looking at the new grade, you know, not based off a lookup table, or maybe you put the lookup table on a color node on the color page, and then do your grade off of the LUT from there. And then now that way, everybody in line is looking at the same, essentially the graded look at that point. So there's many ways to load LUTs in different locations to make it work. So we've we've done it on the media pool. We've done it in the color page. We've done it using the color management tools. There's DCTL that you can use to do this, but that's more of the color management demo, and we're not really getting into that today. But
Yeah.
we'll be happy to talk to you more offline about it if it's something specific you're trying to do.
So a couple other things. Are Resolve project backups and live saves stored on the shared server, or can the backups be saved to the independent workstations as well as the database? So the answer to that is it is saved onto the project server. There are several backup scripts that are floating out there on GitHub and whatnot that can be run on that station to either back up periodically locally. And I've also seen ones where it will back up locally, then upload that to Box or to Dropbox or what have you, which is also a good method. So if I get those links, I will share them. But you'll be able to find them on the forums and GitHub as well, pretty readily. Right, so that's that one. And then let's see. So Claudio is asking about the timeline locking process. That's automatic. So it's first come, first serve. First person to open that timeline or the bin that timeline is in owns that. And you'll have a red playhead that indicates that you own that timeline. Does Vimeo have similar functionality? We've been using Frame.io for some time, but some corporate clients use Vimeo for hosting. So you can publish to Vimeo, but there isn't the markups and that kind of interchange.
Richard Cross said, when I'm mounting, I meant more so in the sense of correcting mismatched drive letters because that's possible in Resolve.
Oh, so that's a good point. All right, so that's a good one. Mixed environments. So Windows and Mac, or Linux and Windows, or whatever combination you want to work with. That happens, and that is definitely a thing. Let me share my screen here real quick. Hopefully I still have it shared up or set up. So to ensure that Windows can see Mac volume paths, which I have here, there's a file path. For Windows computer, that's not going to work, obviously, and vice versa. D drive or Z drive and directory is not going to work. So Resolve has path mapping. So under DaVinci Resolve and then preferences, you can set up your path mapping. And in this case, you can see my mount is volumes / QNAP1. And then my mapped mount is Z:\\. So if a Windows computer adds media to a project, it will be mapped to the Z:\/. And so if my computer then sees that piece of media with that file path, it will convert it internally to this volumes / QNAP1. And my computer will be able to see that media. Super important. Definitely do that. Map them both ways. So this is the Mac to a Windows mapping. You'll also want to map the Windows to the Mac mapping. Even if you think you're not going to add media on that station, you probably will at some point. And then it'll show up as offline. That's a good one.
Yeah, that was a good question.
What else do we got? Giorgio, shortcut for adding timeline markers is the M key, or you can speed up speed editor. Yeah, good stuff. Anything about DRA? Mike, do we talk about DRAs at all? And DaVinci, that's the DaVinci Resolve archive file. That's what we loaded this project with, which is it includes the DaVinci Resolve project file plus the media associated with it.
I mean, for DRAs, we've used them for like moving an entire collaborative project. So if you're, let's say, for instance, you're moving editorial or you're moving to a new location, you can, export a DRA, you can media manage it, or you can, just media manage it with the proxies you've created. If you've created proxies, uh, uh, export the, do the archive, manage it how you want, and then bring it back online in a new location. We've actually done that before. We've done that with a huge feature film, like with 60 terabytes of media. It works. It just takes a little bit of time to media manage it to a DRA. I think in this case, it was a little bit under 72 hours to media manage the 60 terabytes. And then to bring it back online, though, it was only like 4 hours to get it all back online. So it's pretty quick. Once you create your DRA, you can bring it back up online quite quickly. So maybe you're wrapping your editorial offices and bringing it to a studio and bringing the project back online to make deliverables or make changes. That's possible using a DRA. Using a DRA I think if you're just exchanging timelines or you're exchanging media and bins, that it's faster to use the DRT and the DRBs, which weren't available until 17, which is I think partially because we were using this on bigger features. There were requests from the editors on those shows to make it easier to exchange timelines and bins, and DRTs and DRBs are a result of that everybody's benefiting from in 17. So
see another one, using proxies and caches. Is optimized media not used anymore? So with 17, we got proxies. You can still generate optimized media, but really proxies are the better grown-up version of optimized media, because it's now a file that you could actually play on the file system. You can manage it a little bit better. You can relink it better.
you can
But
also,
we are still maintaining compatibility with optimized media from old projects.
yeah, you can take it with you. I think that's the main,
Yep.
the main thing is that if you make proxy media, you can actually save that proxy media and move to a different resolve with the project and relink to proxy media that links back to the OCN. Optimized media, you there's no way of exporting optimized media out of Resolve. You can make optimized media and it's cool, but I think proxy media, since it links back to the OCN and it's a physical file that you can export from Resolve and take it with you, there's a lot of advantages to that.
Okay, and then during a Resolve project archive, are shared LUTs, plugins, etc. carried across, or must those items be manually saved?
Well, I think Matt brought up that LUTs, you can have a centralized folder for LUTs. So if you are using like if you set that up and it's not on because right now, if you load Resolve, the LUTs folder is in, that local location on your computer. If you then move your project, or if you, let's say you bring in a dailies timeline to a different collaborative station, if the LUTs aren't copied to that same local folder on the computer, it's going to give you a bunch of warnings that says it can't find those LUTs. But if you use the new LUT selection folder, like where you can create LUTs, and you use a centralized computer for that, then it doesn't matter where you bring your project on the collaborative station. It's going to find the LUTs because they're all pointing to that same location. I mean, you can do the same. I guess you could share your local, the computer on a local network and do the same thing, but you could just put the LUTs on your centralized storage, or on a separate, you don't really want just on the centralized storage in a folder where everybody can point to it. So that way, if you move it around.
Yeah. Now you can also, and let me share my screen here real quick. You can right click in your project manager and export project with stills and LUTs. So that's a way to get it out. Let's say if you're going to a completely different facility or something like that. Okay, that was it for my sharing there. Let's see, what else do we got? We got a little bit of time.
Yeah. Any other questions in here?
Can set several path translations for one mount point. For example, on Mac, CentOS, and Windows, we have different names for drive paths. Yeah, you can set multiple. I had multiple on mine, so should be doable. Definitely test it before you get way into the project, but yeah, it should work. Yeah, color workflows and whatnot. That's kind of outside of the scope of this. There are going to be other webinars about color management, IPv2 or otherwise. The forum is a good place to talk about color workflows, or sites like LiftGam. Again, you can get real technical with some developers in that way. Is it possible to work on internet like Amazon servers or similar? We went over that a little bit in the beginning. Right now we're in a local environment, and if you set up your Amazon environment so that they're all local to each other, it is possible. There is no, cloud integration, meaning like having your project server in the cloud and working on a local station. That's not working correctly. That's not part of the feature set currently. You can, though, like I was saying, set up a fully encapsulated environment in AWS, or you can have a local environment that you remote into a jump remote desktop or similar. Let's see. Jumping through a couple of these. Genity, maybe you could restate your question. I don't see what that's referring to at the moment. There's been a lot of Q&A, so I'm not sure who posted what. So we set up our database inside our QNAP. Do you guys know how to back up our database by any chance from within QNAP? I know there's a documentation about that. We haven't done that kind of a setup ourselves, so I would refer to that documentation that you were using when you set it up on the QNAP itself.
Yeah.
Is there a limit on the number of machines connected in relation to bandwidth of intranet? That's a good question. We haven't run into that. That I think I would leave to an IT professional to monitor network traffic of both the media and the database traffic to figure out how to parse that out properly. And Tony also says mixinglight.com is a good resource for workflow and technical questions. So that's something to potentially look at. So Genedy is saying it's about path translation. How we should set up 2 or 3 paths to the same mount point. Well, you would just enter in multiple entries for that. I would say also, Mike is sharing our workflow at blackmagicdesign.com email.
Yeah.
For some of these more in-depth things and your specific kind of setups, that would be a good email to get a dialogue going with members of our team. It's Mike, myself, and several others that can help out with kind of very specific questions and have a little bit more dedicated time to work through some of these things.
Yeah. I would say if you have any other questions that we haven't hit on here or specific workflow questions, it's always good to hit us up there. It'll ping everybody on our team and we'll be able to answer those. If there's no other collaboration questions, I think that's it. Thanks for joining us. We enjoy doing these all the time. So look for our next collaboration demo or other demos that we have on the schedule. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Record.